So greetings, blessings and hello. This is Dr. Tom Stafford again for my weekly broadcast here in France about the condition of Britain. I'm a British citizen living now by choice in central France, but still with very close ties to England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, and deeply upset about Brexit. And I'm going to be commenting from a spiritual perspective about this. I'm also concerned about the 1 million plus people in Europe who are British citizens, whose status and security is completely and utterly in jeopardy. I'm just one of over 1 million of us. The UK Parliament seems to have completely ignored, forgotten us. I've been in correspondence with the Speaker in the Commons about that predicament, and there should be an MP or someone representing us. It's completely outrageous. Don't 1 million people's voice count? At the 2016 referendum, I asked, had anybody counted up the votes of the European Brits? And I was told that that data is not kept in the Electoral Commission. They don't know how many people in Europe voted. They don't know which way they voted. I find that absolutely outrageous. Here's 1 million people who, have contributed and are British and European, who have a right to have their voices heard and recorded. Also, in the 2016 referendum, lots of the voting ballot papers never reached people in time, and so even the 1 million people never got the proper voice. So that's one of the many reasons I think we need a second referendum, and I'm speaking actually on behalf, therefore, of those 1 million people, but also on behalf of my myriads of friends still in Britain, my children, and many, many dear friends who still live in Britain, who are deeply disturbed about what's going on with Brexit. And watching it from Britain, it's like watching a slow train crash. It's an absolute nightmare. Where I used to live in Montgomeryshire, near to Montgomery, there's a museum in Montgomery. If you're ever there, go and look. It's in Arthur Street upstairs. It tells the story of the fatal train crash just near Montgomery. There was only a single line back in Victorian days, and 2 express trains were put on the same single line going in opposite directions, going towards each other by mistake because the signal man had given the token in the wrong way or something. And they hurtled towards each other at 60 miles an hour, full-blown steam engines with all passengers and stuff. And they collided, and many people were killed. And the people watching it, from the fields just saw it happening and couldn't stop it. It was one of the worst train crashes in British history, the Montgomery train crash. That's what it's like watching. And I'm deeply disturbed. So my response as a philosopher and academic and poet and intellectual is to try and muster the spiritual resolve that we need as a nation, as people, as a continent, as a planet, because the Brexit has negative implications for the entire planet. That's been shown again and again, because trade will collapse when Britain's economy goes down and Britain falls apart with Scotland and Ireland and probably Wales going their own way. This fantasy that the Tory party have of kind of like, some sort of Britain rules the waves type thing is a complete fantasy that's based on dishonest and bad thinking. If I believed honestly that was possible, and I could sit here hand on heart and say, Boris Johnson, yes, you're absolutely right, we're all patriots, we're with you. I know it can't work, because I lived in Scotland for 7 years and I understand the Scottish mentality. I lived in Wales for many years and I've travelled widely across Ireland and Britain. So that fantasy that he's peddling is simply a fantasy. It's like somebody on the train saying, "Don't worry, trust me. There's no danger of a crash here," and you can see it coming. So anyway, So my point is to muster the spiritual resources, because to me this is a spiritual crisis our nation is facing. As a theologian, as a person who's taught and studied religious studies for many years, I'm concerned about the spiritual health of our nation, and it is flashing red. This resumption of xenophobia and fear, I see fear in people's eyes and minds and hearts. Fear moving to terror because many people are in stark raving terror because of what's happening. And you see, the elites that are pulling the strings don't care about this. They are completely soul dead, I would call them, and have convinced themselves, because they have huge elite jobs that depend on their rhetoric of Brexit is the only thing that's working. They've convinced themselves, just like Tony Blair did in the run-up to the Iraq 2003 invasion, that yes, they had weapons of mass destruction. He'd self-convinced himself, like a master self-hypnotist, that he was able then to convince Parliament. And the BBC pumped out propaganda, that this was truth. However, it's now patently obvious to everybody. It was to me at the time, as coordinator of philosophers of peace and a peace studies academic. I knew it was false. I knew Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. But what I watched was truth being disentangled before our eyes through the media. I'm watching that again. Interestingly, just now there's a new film called National Secrets coming out about the whistleblower in GCHQ, Catherine Gunn, bless her, played by Keira Knightley, who shows that she intercepted an email from the National Security Agency in the US, which is like GCHQ for the US, asking Britain's help to bug the non-permanent members of the Security Council at the UN. Now that is scandalous. and to not just to find out what they were thinking about voting, because the vote was coming before the Security Council whether the UN would back an invasion of Iraq on this they've got weapons of mass destruction lark. And of course the Security Council, especially the non-permanent members who were like the smaller powers, they were some African powers and Latin American stuff, they knew that this is just a joke. Of course they don't have these things. Because the UN itself had said they don't have them. The UN had been looking for them and written them, no, they're clear. So the UN was saying they don't have them. So what was the response of the US and UK was to then bug the non-permanent members of the Security Council in order to get dirt on them, in order to then blackmail them, to force them into voting for that war. That was what this email, this strategy said. And when Catherine Gunn, bless her, and I hope she hears my talk, read it, she had the courage. She was just a normal 27-year-old English young woman. I used to live near Cheltenham. I had friends that worked for GCHQ. I'd meet them walking on Breeden Hill. She said, I cannot just sit on this. This is our country being sold down the river by a superpower that thinks it's beyond morality. Because it has power and a plethora of nuclear weapons, it can then bully and blackmail any country in the world that wants to, with our help. And she said, no, I won't, and she went, bless her, to papers, and eventually it was published in the Observer and it hit the press. And that's what this movie's about, watch it. But, they ignored all this and they launched the invasion the next day anyway. After the Observer published this, bombs started falling in Baghdad without a UN resolution. So technically it was an illegal war. There was no mandate to do it. And these people, in my opinion, still should be held to account. I have a very long memory, and academics like me, we're devotees of the nine muses, whose mother is memory, mnemosyne. That's why there are universities, that's why there are scholars like me. We will pursue this matter until eventually justice and truth come out. Now, fast forward to Brexit, I assure you it is the same strategy and it's the same team that are engineered Brexit. And it's a US-American conspiracy against ordinary British people like Catherine Gunn and me and you, dear watcher. And what can we do about it? Well, we can marshal our spiritual resources. Way back in the early 90s, when I was working for the University of London to create a Peace Studies Institute, which I've now done, it just is autonomous. It doesn't have at the moment a base in the University of London, but like I say, if you want to fund that, thank you very much. We can have a nice little wing somewhere on SOAS or something. So I organised a conference at Prinash Abbey in Gloucestershire it was called Spiritual Resources for Peace and Justice. And it was a very important conference. Lots of people came, faith leaders from different communities. William Bloom came representing the New Age. Peter Young came to represent Sufism from Bashara. A Druid turned up, Douglas Lyne, who was the first real Druid I ever met. I didn't know there were any. He was a friend of the Druid community going way back. And, you know, there was a monk from Prentice Abbey who spoke, the abbot, and it was an amazing event. And it was about marshalling spiritual resources for peace and justice. That's what we should be about. That's what I'm about as a philosopher. So please, you know, let's focus down here. Coming from that perspective then, what I just want to comment on the last events of the last week. I think Parliament is having a spiritual crisis. You know, I love Parliament. I've organised 30 meetings there when I was in London on ethics and spirituality and peace. I used to chair meetings and we used to have discussions. And unfortunately, it's letting me down, this Parliament. It seems to have been taken over by people that literally don't know the right difference between right and wrong. You know, I'm amazed at the lack of ethics in Parliament among the MPs. I've proposed that there should be a new bill whereby MPs have to tell the truth. You know, to me it should be just... I grew up in Britain in a time when that was expected, and if you were caught out lying, you immediately resigned. There was a matter of honour. It seems now that we're in this very strange world I don't recognise, where people no longer feel a conscience about lying. And we now have a Prime Minister who has lied so many times that it's shocking. And he's backed and buttressed up by other people that have taken over the government. As far as I'm concerned, they're an illegal coup, which has been engineered by people without a moral conscience. And they're working against the spiritual interests of my country. And I can only just call them out philosophically, you know, and I'm going to explain why I think that. So Boris Johnson, yes, I've had correspondence with him. You know, I know people in common. We've had some dealings over the years, but every time I've made a suggestion to him, he's always utterly failed to do anything valuable. He seems to be all fluff and puff and hot air and no delivery. I think he's a consummate actor and he's very good at rhetoric, but in Plato's Meno and other writings, the statesman, Plato talks about the role of the statesman as different from the politician. The politician is someone that will lie and self-advance their career and use power and use violence, use threats. That way you don't actually become a statesman. Plato says the statesman is someone that's more of an artist who can weave. And he uses the analogy of a weaver who's making a textile, like Penelope weaving the thing when Odysseus, she was waiting for Odysseus to come home. Because you have to take in many complexities, and then you have to focus on the detail without losing sight of the bigger picture. The weaver has to know that this thread, you know, traced through this loom in this way, is going to be part of the foot of Aphrodite or whatever it is that they're weaving, the bigger picture. Now, you see, politicians don't think like that. They never see the bigger picture. They never think that, if I weave these little lies in here, and this little thing that I know is against my country, and this little thing that, yes, that's going to jeopardise Scotland in the UK. Well, nobody will notice. I'll get away with that, you know, because, gosh, you know, I've got loads of dosh kind of attitude. Those are the people Plato says, you know, they shouldn't even be anywhere near power. They're just like, they should be in school. Because you go to school to learn ethics, to learn to be a statesman. And he ends the statesman with a wonderful thing. He says, there are two main types of people that qualify for statesman potential. There are people of courage, who have the courage, the audacity to act firmly. They have a strong will. They have the courage to speak the truth, even in the teeth of lies and opposition. And then there are the gentle people. The gentle people are those normal people, the great mass of people that don't want to speak out, don't want to, you know, stick their head above the parapet. But they're gentle, they're meek, as Christ called them. Plato says the state is happy when the people of courage work with and support the gentle people. So they don't work against them, they work for them and help them. And that's what a true statesman does. Now, we have the complete opposite. We have people of courage, and I don't deny that these people have a certain degree of audacity. I wouldn't call it courage, it's audacity and ruthlessness. they're working only for their own interests and their class, which is the elite class. They're working against the interests of the gentle people. And poor old Plato, I mean, he's sitting up there in heaven saying, why on earth did I bother to write all those texts? They're going against everything I believe in. So having said all that, Boris should go back to university and do an ethics degree. I mean, the guy is completely failing the country and failing his classical heritage and education. And so I haven't written a congratulatory letter to him. I will when he's forced to resign. I will write and explain why he had to resign, because he's acting in a way that is against the interests of the UK. And against every single member, apart from a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of very wealthy people who've essentially used him to effect a coup. As for Rees-Mogg, coming on to him, well, the same applies. Again, a very intelligent man. But, he's a kind of person that I met in schools when I've been a teacher. I've often taught in British schools, and you get all types in the staff room. He's the guy that does the... He does all the league tables. He does all the nitty-gritty of, how many pupils got which grades this year. And he's what I call a legalist intellectually. Rees-Mogg is, again, not seeing the bigger picture of what's at stake in this country's future. Thinking that he can push through Brexit legally. You can see him sort of rubbing his hands with glee. I've got the Commons now. I'm leader of the Commons. I'm going to engineer it and push it all through that nobody will be able to stand up against it legally. Now, you see, someone that thinks like that is a legalist, technically, in philosophy. They don't do what's right. They don't do what's moral. They don't even care what's moral. All they are concerned about is what's lawful and legal. And that means, do I have the power to do this? Now that is a tradition in Chinese thought that was associated with a whole school called the legalists, who are utterly ruthless. The legalists were the first centralized power takeover in Chinese history, when they basically, under a kind of crazy emperor, they killed all the scholars, the Confucianists, because the Confucianists kept saying, law is only what reprobates and criminals require when they've lost sight of morality. The point of a society, a healthy, happy society, a society of statesmen and women, is one when we're all sensitive to each other and we all do what is right because of our instinct for goodness. And a society that inculcates goodness on people is an ethical society in which virtue preponderates. And yes, of course, there'll always be a few crazy people doing really evil things, but they're a tiny minority of human nature, and mostly pathological. And law, I mean, they won't even be deterred by law, because those people are just bonkers. So the point of Confucius was we have to have a society in which virtue and education for virtue is the primary duty. That's exactly what Plato said. It's at the foundation of our Judeo-Christian classical European civilization, and British as well. It's what the ancient Druids of Britain used to say, and Ireland. Does that make any difference to Rees-Mogg? No, of course not. He wouldn't even. I mean, he'd know what I'm saying, but he would have walked out by now, because he doesn't care enough to listen to facts of spirit. He's only concerned with legal issues, and he believes. Because Brexit was voted through legally, it has to go through. So, there's going to be a difficulty with Rees-Mogg. He will eventually realise, he will have to be made to realise by someone with the intellectual, firepower to stand up to him in the Commons, that, and there are people in Parliament that can do it, that lawmaking and the duty of Parliament is not only about legalism. It's about passing laws and monitoring laws that are of benefit to the entire nation and the well-being of the Constitution and the society we live in. They're certain, and in fact there is a parliamentary code of conduct which you're supposed to decide issues if you're confronted by personal interest versus national interest. you're always supposed to decide in favour of the latter. You can't put private self-interest ahead of what is for the good of the nation. And unfortunately, Rees-Mogg is doing that. He is completely failing. Now, of course, his legalist argument is, so what? Yes, of course I am, but you can't touch me. Because at the moment, it's a voluntary code of conduct. What I'm saying is that that has to become a compulsory code of conduct. And if people proven to be liars, to be acting out of gross self-interest, they should be stripped of their right to be MPs. These people have lost the right to be MPs, in my legal opinion, and I am going to persuade my colleagues in Britain at the highest level of the legal and political profession to pass this into law so that we never have this problem again in Parliament. Because at the moment we are being taken over by, actually people that don't care about the well-being and long-term well-being of the British people. They shouldn't be in Parliament. Okay, so Rees-Mogg also announces very happily that his religious justification for all this, where he's coming from, is he's an extreme right-wing, antediluvian Roman Catholic position, which is the position of Steve Bannon and the position of other key architects of Brexit. It's the position of the brothers that own the Daily Telegraph. Now, these are people for whom Vatican II was a disaster. It was too liberal. These are people that want the Mass in Latin, and that, with any luck, they would like to bring back the Inquisition, because heresy should be stamped out. These are people that want to, undo the Elizabethan Reformation and, would like to put Anglicans in prison because they're too liberal. Vicars that will do same-sex marriages, well, those people should be burning in hell, according to these people. These people are, yes, very, let's put it like this, theologically they haven't kept up with the times. Now, you see, I would regard myself as a Catholic, in hopefully the best sense of the word, as a universalist. I search for universal truth, which is the actual meaning of the word Catholic. And but I do put the emphasis on truth there, rather than legalism. And the reason I think Rees-Mogg and this type are attracted to extreme antediluvian Roman Catholicism is it's a very legalistic faith. It doesn't matter what you do. The mafia love it because if you go out and slaughter the neighbouring family, it looks bad. But if you trot to church, say apologies and a couple of confessions and then do some Hail Marys, you're literally set free from, it's a legalistic kind of approach to spirituality, which is why the Inquisition was able to flourish on that soil. The Inquisition was not stopped in Spain till the 1830s. In Mexico, not till 1848 or something. The Spanish Armada, when it was coming to Britain, had torture equipment on its ships, and when they landed, they were going to put people like John Dee and my intellectual heroes, not to mention Queen Elizabeth, to the rack. They were literally regarding them as heretics. Well, that's where Rees-Mogg is coming from now. So why would he be wanting to do Brexit? Because, that religion is filled with a kind of hatred of the liberal tradition. It has an ancient grudge against it, and it wants to destroy, all that liberalism stands for. And his scathing contempt as he looks out over Parliament, for anyone vaguely left of centre, and his complete arrogance that only he knows the truth. It's buttressed by that thought. And if it will destroy the UK in so doing, well, so be it, would be his argument. Because the UK is a corrupt and dying liberal regime. We don't need it. Something new will come from the fires. That's Steve Bannon's position. And that's, it's a destructive, corrosive acid that's entered the body politic of these people. And I'm afraid, I'm on the other side, as a liberal and as a democrat and a constitutional monarchist and a philosopher who believes in freedom of speech, freedom of thought. I believe in law, but I'm not a legalist. I believe law should reflect cosmic wisdom and justice. So like John Locke, who's one of my heroes, I see the the correlation of our religious arrangements should reflect common sense and intellectually obvious, rational beliefs that are written in all our hearts. And that's the liberal tradition, which says that, like Tom Paine and, the liberal romantics like William Blake and so on. I mean, Rees-Mogg gets up and says he's a romantic. Don't use that term. He doesn't deserve to use that term. He's way off the scale of any kind of romanticism. He's a destructivist, is the word that should be used. And he dresses it up with a smart aleck kind of legalism. And as for any kind of Catholicism, no. I would actually seriously like to have a discussion with the Pope to get Brexit declared a heresy. If these people think they're doing it in the name of Catholicism and the Pope, the only solution to that is get it declared a heresy, because it is. It's a destructive tendency. And occasionally the Pope should realise what's at stake here. And Steve Bannon and co are trying to use their Catholicism as a right-wing firebrand to burn down the house of liberal Europe, which is represented by the European Union, because it guarantees rights to women, workers, the unemployed. It has a social conscience. They're trying to burn the whole thing down. Well, sorry, we've had an enlightenment in Europe. We have had John Locke. We have had Kant. We have had the philosophical traditions of Hegel. We have had very deep thinkers who've insisted again and again and again, like Socrates, that we have to act morally in society, not just legally. Sometimes you have to act illegally. I'm in the middle of France. Sometimes in the war people had to join the resistance. They joined the Maquis. It was illegal, but they did it. They put their lives on the line because these Nazis were acting immorally. So they chose to act ethically, which meant they had to oppose sometimes terrible regimes. That was Camus' point, that the person of ethics sometimes has to realise that they have to operate, beyond the law, and to change the law so that it once again reflects ethics. That's the duty on us as constitutional democrats, So I think Rees-Mogg can be seen off on legal and political and ethical grounds. And Priti Patel, another one of this crew, unbelievable background. She's been convicted of illegal dealings when she was last in office, and it shows to me the lack of, again, interest in morality of Boris Johnson and his inner cronies. If I was a Conservative in the old tradition of the old school, Croker and the founders of the Conservative Party, Walter Scott, that old genuine romantic one nation tradition, I would be appalled that they're reaching for the bottom of the barrel when it comes to illegality. She should be allowed nowhere near power, and the fact that she is now Home Secretary is just scandalous. Another one is Dominic Cummings. Exactly the same thing applies. Again, he's broken the law, and he was convicted of contempt of Parliament. It was very interesting to see what Boris Johnson's answer was to that in his speech. He said, "Oh, well, so what? Yeah. But, like Parliament, you could have done something about that. You have arcane abilities to bring the guy to answer charges. You could have even put him in your prison. And you did nothing of that. So as far as I'm concerned, time served, finished, moved on. He's now a free man." Now, I would say in response to that, Mr. Johnson, that I would say Parliament needs to get its act together, and Parliament should still hold this man, Dominic Cummings, to task for contempt. He should be brought to answer the questions about the illegality of his Vote Leave campaign. He's never answered them in public, he's never answered them on the record. And Parliament needs to get teeth and realise what we're up against. And stop, take the gloves off, guys. We have to fight to save our country. And to see people like Dominic Cummings getting away with crime, Brexit is a crime, it's a crime scene, right? We need to get the evidence on the record before these people succeed in their smash and grab raid on the United Kingdom. They all have different agendas. I'm not saying, that every person that, certainly most of the millions of people that voted for Brexit hadn't got a clue it would end up with a hard Brexit, which is going to be a catastrophe for the nation, in any way or shape you look at it. I know lots of good, innocent kind of people that were tempted to vote for Brexit. And to be honest, for a time, even I was. I thought about it. It was kind of romantic. Let's go it alone. And then I worked it out. I thought it through. I used my philosophical training, my ethical training, and I reasoned, no, it will be disastrous. And so I didn't vote for it. But lots of good people did, and I think they've woken up now. I think they would now change their minds. And that is why the Brexiteer legalists are so desperate to prevent a second referendum. So how do we get teeth? How does the opposition, the Bremain opposition, the vast majority now of the British people, I think, want Bremain, and we need a second referendum. How do we come together to ensure that happens? Well, that's why I've set up here in France and Britain this Centre for Bremain Studies and Action. I'm just about to publish a 250-page book in the next couple of weeks about, the historical sequence of events around Brexit and why it was a disaster and going into it with a fine-tooth comb. My belief is that all the Bremain parties need to come together and form a kind of working alliance, a working think tank, and think through strategy. I think that this includes the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrat Party. The Labour Party has finally come out, really, as a Bremain party. Jeremy Corbyn has said, he's trying to say as loud and clear as he can that, they're now for Bremain. There's a few rearguard voices, but the vast majority of Labour members want it. They want a second referendum, and what Jeremy has said is that in a second referendum they would campaign to remain. Well, that's being a Bremain party, there's no other way of describing it. So they need to get real on that message and say, yes, we're for Bremain. The Lib Dems have been 100% for this ever since day one, and bless them, and they need to really get their act together. But I think they need to work with Labour, and this is where I don't agree with our new leader, Joe Swinson. I think there needs to be a bit of healing. Joe Swinson's rhetoric is a bit, isolationist, triumphalist. We all need humility here. And much as, she's great and we all love her, Ed Davey also had some qualities that might have been also helpful, and I hope he's going to be helping her to see that actually we have to talk as a whole Remain alliance. Plaid Cymru are now very important in that mix. They need to be involved in the discussions. The SNP are vital. They've been heroic in their response. You see, the SNP could have said, to hell with you. They could have just left Westminster. They could have got up and walked out and say, we're going to go for independence, like we're having a referendum. We're never coming back to this corrupt place. But no, the SNP got up and said, look, you're running very close to the wire here, Mr. Johnson, because this might be the last time, you might be the last Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And it was interesting, it was on the day that Johnson was elected, leader of the Tory party and Prime Minister, was the anniversary of the coronation of King James of Scotland and England, which is the first United Kingdom in 1603. That's when we came into being, the Union of Crowns. Well, that's at stake here, and so the SNP are a very important voice. I would add into this mix, I would add the Irish progressives who are opposing Brexit, which includes Sinn Féin, the SDLP, and the Alliance Party, which is like the Liberal Party of Ireland. All of these parties who have, a significant voice in Ireland, Northern Ireland I'm talking about, are utterly opposed to Brexit. They should be involved in think tank that brings them all together. And finally, the Greens, vitally important, huge vote, especially among young people.